All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this first edition of Growth Talks. Notion and Sharpist, how to take your startup global. I hope you're having a good week so far. We have a great session in front of us. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for taking the time. Just before I introduce our two amazing guests, no pressure, Robbie and Hendrik, there's a bit of housekeeping items that I want to discuss. First of all, I'm Michel Gagnon. I'll be your host today. I'm the Global Managing Director of Plista, a Berlin-based ad tech company. I'm also a strategic advisor for Stanana, which is hosting the event today. We have an hour and a half, which I think is more than enough for us to really deep dive in the topic that we have on our plate today. You are welcome to ask questions. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you can ask questions. Actually, you're not welcome. You're encouraged to ask questions. Some of you may be thinking about going global. Some of you may be starting to do it right now. So we have two people who have done it, and they have a lot to learn. So just make sure that you ask questions, and I'll try to weave them into our conversation as we go. So without further ado, one of the good guiding principle in a tech startup is to identify and test your assumptions. So I don't want to assume that everybody knows you guys. I don't want to assume that everybody knows what Notion and Sharpist is. So let's get started with a quick intro. Just tell the audience who you are, what's your role, and a bit about your company. So maybe we can start with Robbie.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for inviting me here today, Michelle. It's an honor to be part of this conversation. So my name is Robbie O'Connor, and I'm the general manager for Notion here in the EMEA region. And for anyone who doesn't know Notion, we're an application that's an all-in-one tool for notes, for projects, for documents, and for collaboration in general. Individuals or teams of tens or hundreds and thousands can keep themselves organized and can coordinate what's going on within their lives or within their work. We have millions of users worldwide, and we've millions of daily active users as well, which is super interesting. We're super early stage in our company growth. We're just 100 Notinos at the moment and growing. We were about 50 in the middle of last year, so we've seen huge growth. We're San Francisco based. That's where our headquarters is, and we're just getting up and running in EMEA as part of our internationalization project.
Great, thanks. What about you, Hendrik?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Michelle. So yeah, Hendrik, CEO at Sharpist. Sharpist helps enterprise organizations grow and develop their people. And we try to do that in the most personalized way, which usually can be done through one-on-one coaching. And once you think of coaching, initially or originally, it had a distribution problem because where would you find the coach? How would you get the coach to your people? And we solved that by moving the conversation just in a video call like we are talking right now. So with Sharpist, the entire coaching happens on a mobile app, and then it's enriched through content that basically sort of transcends into learning journeys. So people can really track how they grow and develop. And when it comes to our growth, we've always been a global organization because all those coaches that work with us, a couple of hundred by now, are distributed all across the globe. And so we help our clients basically grow and develop their people now from the US over, of course, Central Europe, but also down to Africa and China ultimately. And yeah, like maybe a bit about myself. I'm a psychologist by training, so not the classic business guy, which is always quite interesting when it comes to thinking about how can we make sure that also now in the remote world, the relationship that our technology can build with people is actually sustainable and also really, really engaging.
Good stuff. Before we get really started with my super tricky questions, I just want to understand, I think it's useful for the audience to understand where you are at the moment with your internationalization plan. So you kind of covered that a little bit, Hendrik, but can you tell us where you are in terms of expansion and where you are planning to go?
Yeah, totally. So when we think about expansion for us, it's not just driven from a sales perspective, but also always from a perspective of where do we have our coaches and where do we have the learners in the enterprise organizations that we work with. And so basically, that's what I said earlier, right? We have like people all across the globe, literally. So the coaches are in more than like 30 countries by now. So we would start with our clients maybe here in the Germany or Switzerland region, and then very quickly think, how can we help their people in South Africa, for instance, or what do they, maybe they need support on the Philippines, and maybe someone is a new and young leader there. So that's where we always were from day one. And then there's obviously also the sales perspective, because a little bit down the line, we realized that even though our product is entirely about creating strong relationships in the digital, we needed to make sure that some of those relationships with our clients could actually happen on the ground. And there we started here in Berlin, and then very soon took it basically down to Austria, where we had the first clients in the Vienna region. And then at the end of last year, set up something that we call a satellite office in Zurich. And I think it was actually at the end of last year. And so then over the course of the last year, we also entered the Benelux region. So Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, taking the learnings from the Switzerland expansion. And yeah, maybe one last point, because I always forget, it's not a strategic push for us, but we also have a client in Africa, which is quite exciting for us because they're actually distributed across the entire African continent. And that's, a little bit of a struggle when you want to make sure that they also have a very engaging experience.
Great. Thank you. What about you, Robbie?
So it's a very interesting time in Notion. From the inception of the product, it seems like there was a lot of appetite within many international markets for our product. I always come at this in the lens of being a US-based startup. So typically the path is that you create a product and it gets very popular within Silicon Valley with peer organizations, and then it grows throughout the North American continent before it spreads to Europe and probably Asia as well. But Notion from its inception just seemed to have been really, really popular in many international markets. So much so that the majority of our user base is actually based in Asia and Europe, which is pretty fascinating. Which means that for a smaller organization, it needs to scale up and grow up really fast. In order to properly grow your product and your user base within these markets, it's really important to have proximity to your customers, to understand them, to get under their skin, and provide the right levels of support for them. So from our base in San Francisco, we were able to service the rest of the world, but we've now set up operations here in Europe so as we can provide support and build sales teams here as well. Similarly, we set up an office in Tokyo in Japan and have a country manager as well, who's managing the APAC region as well. In terms of the localization journey, our primary customer base right now kind of all speaks English. So our product isn't localized yet in other languages like French or German or Spanish, but that's coming a little bit down the line. As our product grows in popularity outside of the industries that traditionally use English as their first language base, we should start seeing our product begin to penetrate into more traditional industries. So that's something that we're working on right now. And in terms of how the business adapts to our internationalization strategy, once we build our teams within region, we look at how we think about marketing, we look at how we think about our messaging, we look at our website, we look at our product, and we understand how we can optimize it to make a much more localized experience for people in different markets.
Great. And you kind of preempted a bit my next question, but you're forgiven. But my question was a bit more, and I think it's important for the people who are with us today, is to understand the why of going global. Because in my experience, there are good and bad reasons for going global. There something I want to cover a bit later also is where you actually go first. But in your case, if I understand correctly, it feels like the push to go global was that, well, maybe it was luck, maybe it was a strategy that you had in mind, but from what you're saying is it feels like you started having clients outside without necessarily targeting a market. So you were lucky in the sense that you got users or clients outside, and then you say, well, if I want to be able to service them correctly, I need to start thinking about going international. Am I correct, or are there other considerations in your growth plan?
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And sorry for getting a little bit ahead on the last question, Michelle. So yeah, we've been in the fortunate position where, because owing to the product's kind of popularity and its growth, we're being pulled into these regions because, if your user base initially starts with, say, US-based customers for Notion, all of a sudden we start seeing French customers popping up and German customers popping up and, customers in Korea and Japan who need just the next level of support. So in order for us to feel like we're really servicing this user base and this customer base well, we're being pulled into these markets where we want to establish operations so we can provide great coverage for them. From there, however, once you're kind of up and running, we would absolutely look at, where's the next market that we could be targeting for growth as well. Do we have our foot in the door with some early stage users in, say, the Nordics or the Benelux or Spain? And how would we grow upon that? How can we localize our message there to make sure that we're getting a higher level of coverage too? So again, initially it's reactive based on kind of where we are as a company, but over time that does turn into a more proactive approach about how we think about which markets we want to target.
If you don't mind, Robbie, I'm just curious, you said, kind of they need the extra level of service. So what would be a customer demand that ultimately pulls you into a market to say, okay, now we need to make sure, I don't know, that they have certain customer service available in person, or what's this pull factor that makes sure that you locate there?
I think first things first is time zone coverage. So it's a frustrating experience if you make a support request, be it you can't log into your account or your credit card details aren't working for some reason, and there's a 7 or 9 hour turnaround time while somebody wakes up on the other side of the world to answer your response. So first and foremost, just being in the right time zone of your customers is really, really important for an online business like us. And from there, you can begin to notice that specific issues may pop up almost on a regional basis. So in previous companies I was before, we would notice that, credit card transactions were failing for a certain region. And that might have been because there was something to do with how we were accepting transactions from, say, a certain market, which meant that we needed to be able to localize what was going on there and understand how we'd solve it pretty fast. From there, I think, it's great when an organization, or it's great when a customer just has a very localized experience as well. If they're able to visit your website or your product in their own language, if they're able to see customer references and stories from other logos and companies that they recognize, it just provides a more localized experience for them. If they can then interact with the company in their language with somebody who knows their region relatively well, it ultimately provides a better customer experience in my view.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, seems to mirror a little bit with what we experience as well. I must say we have our customer service team basically still centrally located here, and we were having the same debate whether we would scatter them all across the globe. And ultimately, now we found, maybe it sounds brutal, but we've found a rhythm where people could actually work 24/7 here in Berlin, and then make sure that they can provide the local service. While of course with our coaches, that's completely impossible, and also the time zones were the pull factor there. Yeah, thanks for elaborating.
Yeah, of course.
So actually, I'd like to park what you just mentioned, which is, the time zone issue and customer service, because I think there is a cultural element also that is very important. And I'm originally from Canada. When I moved to Berlin, I was shocked by the notion or lack thereof of customer service. No judgment, no disrespect, but very different, let's say, from a Canadian or an American standpoint. So my question to you, maybe Hendrik, just to follow up on that, is have you also faced that? Because I've experienced that myself in Plista, where you are basically servicing Russia, Australia, China, and the US with I would say a team that is majorly is made of mostly European/Germans, and culture is different. So I'm interested when you say, well, we've figured out that 24/7 type of approach with customer centrally based in Berlin. Have you experienced that also? Because people with different culture expect different things, right? And a lot of that is non-written, not necessarily said either. So what's your experience there?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, we've read most of the American books on customer service. So what is it, Tony C.A.? I'm not actually sure how the book is called, but I think every American Bible I think we've consumed here at Sharpist. So I think our customer service DNA is very non-German, you might even want to say. However, what we are actually in contrast experiencing when some of our American competitors start working with coaches all across the globe, they like sort of try to, I want to say, like project their image of what they think how the market functions onto the coach domain. So here's a concrete example. When we entered Russia, like from a coach supply perspective, and we had the first conversations with new coaches that we wanted to onboard on our platform, they said, no, the Americans have been here before. They think we work for $25 an hour in our coaching sessions, and they want us to reserve availability without actually like having bookings in terms of coachings. And that is something where we thought like that was for me really eye-opening, because they thought, oh wow, like we always thought we had the understanding of like how does the certain coach market function, but we clearly did not have. And so in the beginning it involved a lot of listening and really just like being very upfront that like with both our coaches as well as our clients, there's something about their cultures that maybe we are not aware of and we don't know. So that's like one thing that we did. And then we always try, at least when it comes to the coach experience, try to make sure that we have people here on the ground that have a similar cultural context from what are the people that they might be interacting with. So we had people from Russia, for instance, on the coach experience team, also on our customer service team. So we have like people from different regions. That's one part. And the second one that, especially when it comes to client relationships, this really was pivotal to us, was that now whenever we enter a new market, we try to find a partner organization, which maybe works particularly because we are in the enterprise. So in Switzerland, we would, which is, by the way, like it's like Germans always often tend to think that Switzerland is the same, but it's very, very different culturally. And like, do not try to pretend you speak Swiss German if you're German. You're not. I've been there, and it's not like it's not that simple and not funny actually. So, but however, when we entered Switzerland, so we found that partner from the Swiss government actually, who would then introduce us to like client contacts and could make sure to even once we left the conversation, just like feedback us whether we maybe had misunderstood something and so on. And that's a strategy that now we follow in the Benelux market as well, when we partnered with PwC actually to like have client contact in the first place. So like longer answer now, but like really comes down to understanding the cultural context. And we try to afford for that by having other people educate our lacking understanding.
Great. And Robbie, I'm also interested because you are a bit squeezed in the sandwich and I guess you've experienced that quite a lot, because most of your past roles were set up in a way where you were representing or in charge of growing American companies. And again, I always say, if you don't like a specific culture, okay, but you're not going to change them, right? I had experiences myself where people were telling me, well, Michel, the Russians are not following the process. And I was like, well, let's try to change Russia. Let's put that on our agenda on Monday. But there's a lot. I always say, if you are not comfortable, or if you're not able to adapt to a certain markets that you're entering or working with, well, maybe it's better to go back home. I don't want to be too harsh, but what about you, Robbie? Because again, the Americans, without getting into too much the stereotypes, they have a certain way of doing business, which is different from Europe. What have you experienced in terms of, I don't want to say culture clash, but differences, let's say?
Yeah, it's always super interesting to find the middle ground between being able to create processes at scale across the world, while also being able to nuance for local requirements and cultural norms, so to say. And I guess it depends on how micro-targeted you are on a specific audience or a specific region or something along those lines. I mean, ultimately, to begin with, if you're in a position when you're servicing many markets or you have a global preview, it is important to have a degree of rigidity, because it's very difficult to apply different processes depending on where someone's coming from, and you can make a lot of assumptions. So you want to have as basic an approach, I think, to say, for example, your support programs as you can. and just be very, very clear and explicit with what the expectations are, what you can expect. And that being said, over time, as you grow and you have more resources that you can focus on whatever segments or markets that you are focusing on, ultimately you can be a little bit more pliable, depending on what's necessary there. Interestingly, from the lens of the growing US companies, something I really experienced is that the European experience is so enriching for an organization in general. We talk a lot about diversity in today's business place, and it's really important. Or something I've observed is just a difference in the way of thinking, and Europeans are definitely wired slightly different to North Americans. And certainly from people who you'll hire within the APAC region, and just getting a different viewpoint on how you should think about customer service, or how you should enter negotiation, or how you should tailor your product, ultimately really, really enriches any organization. So fortunately, with the companies that I've been part of before, bringing on board people who have a different viewpoint from different parts of the world has been a hugely enriching experience for the organization in general. And if you create the right environment where those viewpoints are kind of understood or heard, then you ultimately find the right middle ground, which helps you address your target audience quite well.
Yeah, and so, I mean, probably both of you read the No Rules book from Reed Hastings and Aaron Meyer, and I think it's just the passage on cultural diversity and also culturally diverse organization is just super enriching. I found really to think about, it's not just your clients, but it's also the people that you bring on board in your team, right? Because suddenly when you start growing, you start having people in all sorts of remote locations. You need to, there are different conflicts where you maybe in the first place don't really understand why they surfaced at all, and then you suddenly realize, maybe people in the Netherlands are just much more direct than Americans, for instance, also.
Great. One thing I want to talk about, though, so just maybe to wrap this up about culture a bit and make sure we give very concrete advice to our audience, would you say that, when you get started, you're making your first step internationally, is the prudent approach to start close to home so that you're not stretching yourselves too far in terms of cultural differences? Because apart from cultural issues, there are also potentially legal. We talked about, contract negotiation. So would that be a good takeaway for our audience? There's no consensus here.
I think I would say start I mean, if I were to start Sharpist again, maybe even I would set it up in Munich now, because we even before the talk, we were a little bit talking about regional differences and also client differences in Germany. So I would try to be as close to my customers as possible, not as close to my personal home, but really have the opportunity to spend a lot of time with them. So our very first customer was actually based in a small village in Switzerland, close to Zurich, before we had any office there, and we just tried to spend a lot of time with them. And that was back then when it was not normal to have a video conversation over a client pitch, especially not with enterprise clients. That was very, very time consuming, and also very kind of exciting to us as young founders back then. And if I were to do it again, probably I would really locate my company in the heart of Munich, because there's just so many enterprise clients there, and then kind of try to go from there.
Okay. But my point was more, Hendrik, was more if you look at your path, you're based in Berlin, and one of the first markets that you enter was Austria, Switzerland, which are typical, German-speaking markets, and they're kind of natural. Yes, I agree. The Swiss are different from the Germans. The same thing, I'm sure Austrians would argue. But from a cultural perspective, it's not as much of a stretch as, jumping into the US, Australia, or China, for instance. So that was a bit my point.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely correct. That's what we experience now also with our client in Africa, the African Leadership Network, that really that is located in Rwanda, but also in Mauritius, for instance, and it's completely across the continent, and where I, for instance, have hardly any understanding about the different cultural complexities. And so of course we need to seek a lot of contact through our partner. Actually reminds me about one of my first companies where we very early on went into Oman and set up our offices there. and we didn't really know whether we should have gone to Oman or the United Arab Emirates. And it was like really, really exciting, but probably I would say back then the smarter choice would have been to, in that case, stay in Munich rather than just like scatter our own company all across the globe and try to understand like not just culture, but also legal difficulties and like even like procurement processes that can be like very, very different across different regions. So I would second the statement, probably say, yeah, stay close to what you understand, which is not necessarily your home.
Okay. We have a question from Dennis. Thanks, Dennis, for breaking the ice. Dennis is asking, how critical is it for business going global to communicate in local languages and B, to provide automatic translation for user-generated content? So I don't know, Robbie, you've talked about localization. I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it fully depends on your product and it depends on who your target audience is. For our perspective, many of the companies that use us at the moment, as I mentioned, their primary business language, no matter where they are in the world, is in English. So they can work with our product there. That being said, we're limited in our total addressable market because there's many organizations that need to operate within their own local language. So I think that's the first thing to kind of think about. If we're targeting this specific area, who are the people and what do they need, and are we able to resource those needs? In terms of automatic translation for user-generated content, this is a very interesting little micro industry. By the way, it's not even a micro industry; it's a big industry. The fact that products grow so fast now and they become global almost by default from the beginning means that companies are faced with the issue of international users faster than they would imagine. And there's a number of services certainly that we use that provide pretty high fidelity, quick translation services. So to give you an example, if we have a user based in Japan who writes into us in Japanese, I have an issue with something, we do have a service within our support team that can quickly translate that into English, and then the response can be fast translated back into Japanese. Now, it's not the same as having somebody Japanese speaking that language who can interact with that customer perfectly, but I've been so surprised with some of the options that are on the table and are available for those pieces there.
And what about you, Hendrik? You talked about Russian coaches, American, you're in Benelux, in Africa. Do you have any specific approach to localization in terms of languages?
Yeah, and I must say, like, for us, it's maybe easier and more complicated because, like, in the first place, we said, okay, let's be everywhere with our coaches, which is a benefit, right? Because they can speak the local languages that might be required by a coachee. So that was like always quite good. However, that sometimes then linked to an expectation of clients to say, now I want the entire app also to be with Cyrillic letters. Of course, we couldn't do that, and we have not done that yet. And I also want the content maybe not just in English and German, but also in French or Spanish. And so that's indeed something where we realized, oh, maybe by having such a global setup, we've created an expectation set in our clients that does not necessarily match what we can deliver just now at the scope of our company. So now we are very much upfront with new clients. We would say the coaching can be in any language that you might require. And then the content like predominantly exists in German, English, and French. And that's like what you can pick from. And the app also itself is just German and English. But you will not like experience a certain button then suddenly in French because you want that. So that directness has proven quite helpful because clients then realize, oh, the core feature, the coaching interaction I can have in the language of choice, which matters the most to me. However, what Robbie described with regards to the like support translation, that's like something that we like tried as well, and where we kind of needed to be very quick. I think for Bulgarian clients, particularly of ours, in that one case, because they wanted to make sure that some parts of the interaction could just be in their local language. And I must say, I'm not sure I would do it again in our case, because it was like, it created a lot of like nervosity in our teams, trying to make sure that they have this wonderful experience and everything is to be understood. But we were never entirely sure whether the translation that we had was correct or just something like completely bogus. So it ultimately required a little bit of patience also from our users with us to understand that maybe there was not a local person talking to them, but actually just a translator.
Great. And one thing I want to talk about is maybe if we backtrack a little bit, is to think about the planning. So we've covered the why of going global, which can be different for different startups depending on your situation. But I think with technology, it's a bit of a blessing and a curse because you can very easily build stuff that maybe nobody wants. You can easily add a new feature that nobody wants. It's the same thing when you go global, right? It's so much easier to find clients and users internationally today than, let's say, if we were in the aviation industry and say, okay, let's plan, we need to set up a plant in Morocco to have a better footprint in terms of supply chain, in terms maybe of cost. I mean, these projects, I used to work on that in my previous life. It's a lot more of numbers crunching and making sure that you're picking the right place, because there's a lot of upfront costs associated with this. So when you guys are thinking about going global, I'd like, to make it very simple and straightforward for our audience. Where do you actually start? What's your typical first step? We've talked about finding a partner or hiring somebody. In your experience, what's the right or the typical first steps that really make sense? I don't know who wants to pick that one up.
Yeah, I can jump in first. So I don't know. I just have a bee in my bonnet about planning. I think planning is the most important thing that any organization can do and needs to do really, really well. And it's a skill from a leadership perspective to create the right forum and spaces, to table the right conversations, to connect your company's financial needs and its growth needs with its operational feasibility, with resource planning, and to align everybody around what you want to do. From my perspective, going global or going international or taking the next step to another market is tough. It's hard to do, and it needs full buy-in from everybody within the organization who's going to be a key stakeholder of it. Without that key alignment, or with only partial alignment, you're going to see problems from the very, very outset. And so, the better that you can tie in your planning with your international expansion ambitions, the better you're going to be setting up your project for success, in my mind. Being very realistic around, what are the medium and longer term goals? And then in the short term, what does the setup process look like? And how do you effectively build the environment in order to ensure that you can give it the best shot to get to where you want to get to in the medium and longer term? So I've seen scenarios where, because, growing is like a very sexy concept, and new markets are like, exciting. And I've seen scenarios where we've gotten like ahead of the game, and far away hills have been green without really understanding the operational reality of what it means to take on these big steps. And it just means that you're reconstructing, or you're trying to fix some stuff that wasn't set up properly from the beginning. So I think planning is like one of my favorite words. Anyone who's worked with me before will be like, "Yep, I know exactly what he's talking about." Because it all, you got to tie these things up reasonably well.
Yeah. What about you, Hendrik?
Yeah, total +1 on that. I think when we were just quite young as a company, again, because we had so many coaches across the globe, we thought, like, why not sell to the world? And I think we started thinking about, now let's go to the Nordics and let's just go UK, Ireland, and the US, and we can sell to anyone. Until I think one of our board members said, like, wait a moment, don't we have enough clients here in Germany first to cater to? And that was it was really eye-opening and important to us, because it focused us to really dissect the market and understand, okay, what clients are actually where and which are located in which markets, and when will we also make a conscious choice that we've kind of reached enough saturation on our home market. And then one thing I think that we did different about our Switzerland expansion was that we always considered that kind of an experiment. So we were feeling this pull from our clients to be there with them on the ground. And then we thought, so that was during the pandemic, and we thought, okay, look, does it really make sense to set up a full office there now and hire people? And we almost had done that, but then we said, why can't we just send a sales team from Berlin to Zurich for a limited period of time? Say we have our satellite office there, book some office space, make sure that they have their hotel rooms, and basically then just like understand like what is it actually that our clients need on premise, and like why do they want us to be in that region, and also can we create in a very like compressed time frame, can we create enough demand beyond the clients that we have already to then justify later on to go into that market. And that's like something that how we are definitely or most likely going to do it about every market now. So always like send kind of a like an expansion team just there to run a little bit of an experiment for like 2 weeks, wait maybe a month, and then more consciously be able to decide whether there's actually sufficient justification to have any sales force on the ground permanently.
Great. So limit a bit your risk and investment by just sending a recon mission to some extent, see if there's an appetite, and then depending on the answer that you get, then you can plan the next steps.
Yes, and maybe like to add on to that, like also with regards to sort of like in our case the coaches and also the customer service that we provide, I would be much more upfront with our clients now. So like back in the early days, whenever one of our clients said like, yeah, look, this is a huge opportunity. We have like 200, 300, 400 people that we want to coach there. We need you to be in China. Like what I would have done, like company 6 months old, probably called our coach experience team and like pressured them. Yeah, we need to recruit people in China now. We have to sell to that region. And then like usually in enterprise, the procurement process starts and like people try to understand, and suddenly they realize, oh, it's not 500, it's actually 50. And so really they're also not like being very upfront again and very direct to understand like what is it really that I'm getting into? Is this just like a beautiful castle in the sky, or is it a real concrete opportunity that justifies to have like any sort of like services in a particular region?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good segue into Clémence. I believe it's Clémence, right? Clémence's question, where she asked, what are the next steps for both your companies in the internationalization process? And I think the follow-up question is really interesting. What did you, a bit similar to what you were mentioning, Hendrik, what did you recently decide not to do and why? Robbie, any...
Yeah, absolutely. So taking a slight step back as well, it's so interesting, Hendrik, what you're mentioning there around just aligning all the stakeholders, how you do it. It's so, I can't reiterate the point enough to say it can be so much fun to talk about which markets you want to go after next, and if we just do that. But part of the planning process is ensuring that that sales and marketing side is well set. The go-to-market side is in agreement, but also you got to speak to your legal team and say, how do we do this? Do we need to set up an entity in this region? How are we going to pay people? Do we need to get an office here? Will they be working from home? Will there be a remote or like a shared office space kind of environment? Those conversations can be like more hard hitting from a reality perspective, which is super interesting. Does this change our tax perspective? There's a lot of considerations that need to be thought about, which need to support and align the go-to-market strategy. Michelle, to go back to Clémence's points, so to answer your question first, stuff we haven't done and why. There's always trade-offs. When you're making decisions to do this. And it depends on your resources and your priorities as well. And I always think there's an element of phasing, which is this can happen now, this can happen soon, and this still needs to be figured out before we do this next element of it, which I think is interesting. To give like a real world example of that, I think joining Notion, I was really bullish that I wanted to get like a really solid marketer on the ground straight out to be like here and be present and figure out all these markets first. And the reality is that our marketing team in Notion is still pretty small. They're small but mighty, like incredible people, but there's still like a degree of evolution that's going to happen in our headquarters team. So when we thought about like the right profile of person to hire to work with me in the region to build our marketing presence, I was thinking that's going to be it might be a tough journey for them if they are 8 hours away from the rest of the team, if they have to do all of their influencing in a 3-hour window at nighttime, while the rest of the team has like another 6 or 7 hours to brainstorm on initiatives. So we actually decided that we would instead pivot the position to the head of international marketing, and that would be based in San Francisco, where they would have direct access in time zone to all of the key stakeholders that they're going to need to be able to influence to build an international marketing plan. And in time then, we decided they would hire people within the region who become a close partner. But in order to influence that organization as well as we needed to, we decided to make that slight pivot. So that was one of the do not decisions that just has been on my plate in the last month or so.
Yeah, it's actually, it sounds like pretty similar to what we decided not in marketing, but also in sales. So when we saw sort of the first like additional regions to Germany like working quite nicely, we thought we need to have like on the ground experts that really understand perfectly understand the Benelux market, perfectly maybe understand the Nordics market, which is something that we discussed. And now we are rather hiring for a global VP to like then set up their teams below them to see kind of what like also makes sense to span out, because we just had to realize that us as founders, we would be like probably too excited by any sentiment coming from a certain market that we right away wanted to send a person there. And I think like just hiring a senior leader that has like more of that overall global experience can be helpful. Maybe one more point on like one thing that we decided not to do recently. Was actually when we looked at the French market. So now as like coaching itself is like really kind of booming as a topic. Maybe you've heard that Prince Harry has just become like the I think chief impact officer at DataUp, like one of the American role models to our business, I want to say. So the topic is like really hot, and there's a lot of companies also like now popping up in Europe. And so when we eyed on France as a huge market opportunity also here in Europe, we saw that there's actually a couple quite successful companies already working with enterprise clients in the region. And so we thought, is it really now the time to go head to head with those in the competition? Or is there maybe even opportunities to either like work with them together, partner up with them, or rather than like explore different markets, like for instance, the Nordics, which is a very affluent region, but not so densely populated when it comes to like coaching and personalized learning solutions.
Okay. I want to continue on this, and maybe I'll be mixing two questions together. I apologize in advance, but in my experience, when you go international, in some organization, it makes sense to create this global growth or international business separate team. Right. So where you have a few folks, maybe it's sales/marketing, maybe you have somebody who knows a bit legal, somebody who's, from your finance team. Is this something that you've done or considering doing? Or maybe you have, if you're not using that approach, you have a better one?
So it's interesting. I guess I can jump in there first, Hendrik, if that suits. Again, I must apply this from the lens of US company kind of expanding internationally, because quite quickly, I think organizations will realize that the international markets and international expansion requires a heavy degree of quarterbacking, to use an American term, and that you need to find the right balance between creating an individual org, which is responsible for a wide spectrum of go-to-market activities just for your international markets, or like a ninja team, which is able to influence correctly all of the existing functions in order to provide regions and markets the resources that they need in order to move forward. And I've actually seen it done both ways, and it fully depends on the personality of the senior stakeholders within the business, and kind of how the company is set up. I think what's most important is that whoever is responsible for the international expansion, hopefully it's on the CEO or the COO's desk, that they're very mindful about how they're setting up the initiative and the project for success, that they have the right people who have the right clear way, and expectations are set within the organization that we want to set them up for success in order to do that. So to give you a concrete example as well, in my previous organization, we set up in Dublin again, and we had our sales team, and we did a degree of marketing and CX. Based in the region as well. But we still felt somewhat blocked because there was still a degree of disconnect between teams in headquarters and teams within the region. So we decided, how are we going to fix this? Do we need to hire a VP of international, or how do we make this work? Instead, we decided to hire a mid-career, high caliber MBA type person who acted as the voice for the region within headquarters. And their job was to partner really closely with the regional general manager just to do all of the on-the-ground digging work and influencing that needed to happen with our larger marketing function, our larger customer success function, our larger sales function, just to ensure that some of that alignment is really, really, really tightened up.
Yeah, indeed, with us, it's something that indeed sits with my co-founder Fabian, the COO. And then like usually he would have like support of the different specialized teams. But what we try to make sure is that we have like our sales teams are sort of representative for certain regions, of course, even if they are centrally here. So probably like a little bit smaller scale than in Notion's case, but I would say it's like you can kind of like mirror the approach to our organization as well.
Great. And Robbie, you mentioned something important. You said, you know, there was still a disconnect with the headquarter. I think Hendrik is in a different situation. He may be, in some cases, the disconnect. But what I'm saying, what I'd like to kind of deep dive on is try to understand in your experience, and I think it can be very useful for our audience when you're thinking about going global, is usually what is that disconnect? Or, you know, is there anything that, you know, the headquarter, like a mistake, let's say that the headquarter makes when it's time to go global, or maybe it's in the relationship with headquarter and you in your case. Anything specific without naming names?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the nature of this industry is that it's fast growing and fast moving, and every quarter is slightly different. Every year half is definitely different, and every year is radically different, is the way that I describe it. And things stretch, things grow, initiatives turn into pilots, turn into, you know, functions. Some things you may have put big bets on actually were overestimated and kind of scale back. And the reality is that much of the thinking and experimentation and push will naturally happen in headquarters. And so I think it's really, really important on regional leaders to create very, very, very clear channels of communication, to remain very plugged in with what is going on within headquarters, what's the sentiment, what are the trends, what are the thinking. And then from leaders' perspective, you know, if you have taken a plunge on setting up international operations, just being really, really mindful to understand what's going on within the region, what are the trends that they're seeing there, and if there's a divergence happening from, say, what's happening in headquarters, and we'll call it the North American market from my perspective, to kind of what the necessities are within the region. It can happen that silos open up, and that, you know, what's good for the goose is not good for the gander, and you start seeing a little bit of conflict arising with people saying, well, we want to do it a little bit differently here in the region, or we have a different viewpoint. From my perspective, I got some really good mentors who have been in positions where they've been leading regional teams. And I think a lot is on the shoulders of the general manager within the region, or whoever is seen as the figurehead there, just to be quite present in headquarters, to remain very clued in to topics of conversation and trends that's happening in headquarters, and to constantly communicate what your plan is. Here's what you're seeing, here's what we need to do next, here's what we want to do next. So as, you know, a few months don't go by and you've missed the ability to connect, you know, something that's moving fast within headquarters to what your needs are in that specific area from within the region. So personally, I made it you know, I probably try to get to headquarters maybe minimum once, maybe twice a quarter. If anything, to continue connectivity, to build relationships, to continue to broadcast the plan for within the region, and work with say, any global or functional owners who have a purview into your region as well.
Maybe like a follow-up question on that one, Robbie. Like, how do you go about playbooks, for instance? So maybe like if you observe the Ubers or you know that they have like a lot of playbooks, right? That they centrally would create, rather like maybe like getting experience from the decentral locations, but then they would push that again like decentrally to the regions, and basically almost every region would have to play by that particular playbook. Is it something that you're doing the same way at Notion, or have you found a different approach?
So interestingly, it fully depends on how the organization is set up as well. If they want to be very deliberately, we have a hive mind, and that's based in one location, and we push out the playbooks and they're executed on, I think that's fine. Once the expectations are well set within the region and you have the right people hired, that it's not a frustration for them, then I think that's totally fine. Other organizations, I've seen that they want to deliberately assign responsibility to people within the region. So they may hire the global head of some function and put them into a different region, and that person has a seat at the table within executive conversations and can ensure that kind of communication flows in different ways. Ultimately, I think it depends on the organization, on how they want to set themselves up. But as long as they're super mindful not to create communication silos and gaps, it means that you'll keep everybody pretty much on the same page. the way I think about it.
Yeah, because I think in your case, Hendrik, you're a bit like in my situation where you're, at the headquarter, and then you have people in markets who are pushing. They're telling you sometimes, well, you don't understand the market here, these kind of things. And it's also a very challenging place to be, because in the end you have to make the calls, right? So you have to find that balance between, well, I need to make sure I'm in touch with the local markets, and I understand that they may be different from Germany, but obviously you're hiring people in markets for them to drive growth. So obviously they'll be pulling. So how have you managed that tension so far?
Yeah, interesting point, and it reminds me even more of my time at Rocket when I was working with a global food delivery company, and because we had set up all those beautiful dashboards and metrics, and we knew the benchmarks for, I don't know, delivery times, salaries, and we tried to push that into the region and had calls with the regions continuously. And some of them were, I had the feeling, almost making fun of us, because they thought look, you don't really understand the local market here and how things function. For us, I must say, it's mainly now, and I think one driver is the pandemic, is that we've basically first, everyone can work from anywhere anyways. So it doesn't feel that different anymore. And we have we are still pretty much working in teams. So even though we have maybe a small business development sales team for Benelux, and one for Switzerland, one for Germany dedicatedly, and maybe one for new markets, they would check in on a very frequent basis as one team, and then have a knowledge exchange, and that basically on a weekly basis. So I have the feeling that they rather understand themselves as the sales and business development teams, less so as we are the Benelux team now here in the company. So I think that's something that our scope and size of business still allows us to have. However, I must say, we very early on then again looked into concepts like playbooks and thought, how can we write down all the learnings that we took from the push to Switzerland, and make sure that at least when we start a new region, people can make a conscious choice whether they want to stick with what we would recommend or whether they deviate from it. Because one thing that I think probably is also very dear to the Notion as a company and as a product even, what we hate the most is if we have to think things again. And so that's whenever we go in a new market, we kind of try to build onto the same knowledge management and the same thread to see what can we learn from this, and what are we consciously making differently from a different market.
Right.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, Hendrik. It makes sense. And it's not a rule of thumb, but the way I've kind of seen things kind of pan out is almost like an 80% adherence to the central playbook, with allowance for maybe 20% nuance, depending on what's topical within the region at that time. If it goes beyond that, it's a stretch on the organization. If you are 100% playbook oriented, maybe you could be doing a little bit more. Maybe you could be tailoring your approach to different markets well. So that's kind of a thing that I keep in my mind, is an 80-20% rule to be.
Okay. And just for everybody, make sure everybody understands, by playbook, we mean it's a summary of, this is the plan. This is how you should be entering a market. This is the order, checklist, all the leanings. Correct? Yeah.
And I mean, one of the most extensive formats of that I've ever seen was actually at Rocket, when we had it was the 100-day launch plan, to kind of launch a new company. And I think you can apply that, however, also to launching a new market. For us, to be honest, it's more really a checklist of okay, those are the legal questions that you have to ask yourself. This is kind of the tax-related question that you might think of. This is the person that you go to if you are considering this. And those are the hypotheses that we want you to test. That's kind of the cost question. So basically everything that we've thought around the topic, in a somewhat structured format written down, so that you can copy templates for doing it again.
Great. Dennis, I understood. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Michelle, if I jump in there one more sec, just to add a further kind of example as well. I know we want to give as many examples. So from our perspective as well, if we were to spin up, say, a customer lifecycle marketing team as well, and say we look at our entire user base and millions of people around the world, and we want to send them all a message that says, we have got this new feature that you should check out. But the team may also want to send out a happy 4th of July message. We'd be like saying, hold on a sec, let's not send that out to this massive section of our grouping. Let's localize that to a specific market. However, let's definitely send a happy Bastille Day message to all of our French users, and let's do something similar that's like applicable to the Nordics and the Benelux and Germany. When that's the kind of the nuance that you begin to kind of phase in over time from our perspective.
Great. Very useful, Dennis. Yes, we'll get to the business book. I wanna keep that easy one for later today, and I know that our guests have a long list of recommendations. But just before we get there, I maybe Robbie, since Hendrik, if I'm not mistaken, your approach is more it's a B2B more of a business model. Whereas things are a bit more different, I would say, with you, Rob, to a certain extent. I'm interested in the sales and marketing approach. And, you know, when for you're covering EMEA, which is a very diverse region. So what's your approach in terms of sales and marketing? Are you going to say, well, I'm going to pick one market based on very detailed analysis or based on existing users, and then, you know, I'm running campaigns? Or do you have... Can you give us a bit of insight on your playbook?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, Europe is such a fun region. It's fascinating. It is an economic powerhouse. It has many different markets that are operating at different speeds. Some very large markets with big economies, some very large markets with slower economies, some smaller markets with very powerful economies, different levels of affiliation for technology and likelihood to adopt as well. So as I mentioned, you know, going to Europe can be a very fun, sexy thing. But then when you get here, there's like, you know, a lot of decisions to be made, and you got to operate a car running in different gears at different times. So for me, the first step is always to look at the data. Take a really good look at the data and understand, you know, what the matrix looks like from, you know, affiliation with your product, target audience. Does it exist within a market? Barriers of entry into that market as well for your product. What's the size of the prize within this market as well, and what you're targeting for. And then, you know, what resources do we have at our disposal, and how do we prioritize what we do first and where we go first. I don't think, it's not rocket science. Europe is somewhat predictable from a technology perspective. There's three massive economies in the UK, Germany, and France. The Nordics is typically quite forward-leaning in looking at new technology. The Benelux follows behind there as well. And then Southern Europe can go a little bit slower. Eastern Europe has been super surprising to me over the last 5 years in terms of the amount of companies which are very adaptive to new technology as well. And then you always get fun surprises in the MENA region and in Africa's region as well, where there's newer economies that are growing, that are adaptive for technology as well. So the way I look at it is that based on looking at all that information, finding a matrix which says this is the market that it makes sense for us to target first. We have a degree of users here, we have penetration, we can develop customer proof. We can staff teams which will focus solely on this market relatively easily. And then over time, we look at the next market, the next market, the next market. And we may decide not to do certain markets or have a purely opportunistic approach to some markets as well, until a time comes when we have more resources to penetrate a little bit more fully. So that might be like a very high level overview of my approach. Is there anywhere you'd like me to kind of drill down into in more detail?
Yeah, but I was just trying because, you know, we have all limited resources, you know, even when you get bigger, it's never enough. So I was just trying to understand if you pick a certain market, and maybe for different markets, you have different needs. Right, so maybe for Spain, you have a lot of users and you say, well, it's more a question of customer service support here and setting ourselves up to succeed and make sure we get a good retention. And for others, if you say, well, I really want to penetrate the German market because of the size of the prize, like you mentioned, well, then I'm going to go all in on marketing. That's what I was kind of looking for.
Yeah. Well, I think you answered the question there yourself. That's kind of fully the way that I think about it. And, you know, from our perspective, again, I'm very in a fortunate position that our product exists quite well in a lot of these markets, and we've good affiliation in the UK. France has been really surprising for me in previous organizations. France has been a bit slower on technology adoption, and the economy has been a little bit more locked up in more traditional industries. And the digital transformation hadn't really started there just yet. However, in the last 5 years, with the emergence of the tech scene in Paris, with Macron really pushing e-commerce, with like startup hubs and VCs like Station F and Index Ventures investing heavily in technology ideas there, we're starting to see France opening up a little bit more. So Notion is super popular in France. It's pretty much within most startups and scale-ups that are there, which means that bigger industry players or more traditional industry players are looking to the tech scene for innovation. They're looking to understand how they can be more agile. They're looking for the innovative thinking that happens within this particular space, and bring it into their own organizations. And we're fortunate that Notion follows that path of moving into those bigger organizations as well. Whereas in previous companies, Germany has been stronger. The Berlin scene that you both know very, very well, where there's a strong affiliation for technology now, and an appetite for new leading edge technology products has been important. Where we need to dial up awareness of our product within Germany a little bit more, to build more market affiliation there.
One question that I have, because we've talked about going global, and as you said, Robbie, earlier, it's exciting. Hendrik, you mentioned, let's go to China, let's sell to the world. It's exciting to grow, but I also want to talk about the other side, let's say, of the coin, which is closing down markets, because not all market entries are successful. If you tell me that's the case, I do not believe you, but there are sometimes mistakes, or sometimes it's a question of timing. So can you share maybe a bit of your experience, maybe if it's not necessarily with the current organization that you're with, maybe in the past where you said, well, this one was a big mistake because reason ABC. It's okay to share failures, guys.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I think in our, maybe we are still a little bit too young as a company, luckily enough, right, to have made big mistakes in that regard. Obviously every once in a while, that's more now with the coach experience part, what happens is that we realized, we don't need as many. And then for us, it's always in our business, you always need to outbalance supply and demand, right? And I think that's it's a bit generic, because I couldn't pinpoint and say, okay, this was a region where we definitely pushed too heavy and onboarded too many coaches. However, what we've generally learned, and it's a bit around what we talked about earlier, I think, is that for us, that approach of, there's some client interest, now we need to immediately have the supply ready. That's something that we fundamentally changed. So how we think about it now is, how can we set up processes so that basically once we have a certain degree of demand, we can almost immediately provide the supply. So it's it's less so, the interest is there, and now we start recruiting coaches and build communities. But now we start asking our questions, how can we understand the coach community much more from a global perspective in the first place, and make sure to build partnerships with, for instance, in our case, the International Coach Federation, or the local associations in a particular region, without actually trying to directly promise to any coach or any partner of ours that we would have business for them. And so I think one mistake that definitely we did in the early days was I think the Philippines was one of those markets where we thought, okay, our client has a production plan there, so we need to be there for sure. And then we started reaching out to a lot of partners, promised them this huge opportunity. And now I think with a company being a bit more mature, we can actually be say, look, we don't actually know whether we will go there. We think it's an exciting opportunity, and we would like you to partner with us in case we have a business opportunity here. And then we so in our process with our partners and suppliers, we go until the step where we say, okay, this is we have everything ready. All the paperwork is ready. They are assessed on our platform, whether they are good coaches to work with us. We have maybe run a couple test coachings, but we are not we haven't sent our customer service team out there yet and said, okay, our customer support team, and told them, look, now you need to be ready for that market as well. We haven't necessarily gone as far to check whether like whether we like our app is definitely working in, like, let's say, like under the golden shield of China, for instance, before we have like any particular demand. So it's maybe not the answer that you were hoping for. So we haven't any particular market where I could say, okay, this one blew up and we kind of retracted from it. But we are just generally much more cautious when it comes to like comparing early excitement with actual like market demand.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be a full blow up, right? By this I mean that there's an opportunity cost to every market that you open, and we've talked about resource, or the limit that we have in terms of resources. So sometimes what I'm trying to get to, and maybe Robbie, you can jump in here, is that sometimes you will open a market that initially looks good, but in the end, it start maybe draining a bit your resources and your focus. And it's very, very easy to get overstretched. So sometimes you have to make calls where we say, well, what we're getting out of the market is not worth the effort that we're putting in. So I don't know if, Robbie, you've experienced that in the past.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think risk is really important within an organization. You know, you're not going to grow unless you do take some calculated risks and some gambles. So taking some of these steps is not something to ever be afraid of. It's just one to be very eyes wide open and to have done all your homework and all your math and being realistic around the feasibility of doing some of these pieces. So, you know, failures just are great learnings. And you know, when you do take a risk and say something doesn't work out as much, it's just important to kind of learn from it and continue to grow from it as well. So to give you some kind of examples, you know, in a previous organization, we were considering whether we continue with our inside operations from our Dublin hub, and at what point do we look at investing in field sites to give us even more proximity to, say, like potentially higher value customers. And you know, to do $1 million deals, you have to be down in Munich, Henrik, as you were mentioning earlier on, with all the manufacturers and the car companies. You have to know them, you have to take them for dinner, you have to know their cousins, et cetera, which is one way of thinking about it. And I'd say in the previous organization, we probably overestimated the difficulty of operationally setting up and stretching and ensuring that we can create a strong working environment for the people who are there, that they feel very much part of the central team, and that we're giving them the resources that they need to be successful. Also understanding whether our product was in the position that we are actively able to target that segment well. So I think in a couple of cases, we were very ambitious in our aspirations, and ultimately, you know, we weren't able to deliver from a company perspective to ensure that those teams were able to be successful. And, you know, it's a painful experience for some people in those sites or in those offices if they don't feel like they have all of the company backing that we should have secured from the outset. Is the way I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Because it's very difficult. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, after you.
It's very difficult also to pull the plug. You know, when you're a business leader, it's very easy to start new projects, and you know, when you've allocated resources to a new market and you know, put a lot of effort, it's tough for you to say, you know, it's not going to work. It's tough because you think, well, maybe in a few months, you know, things will pick up, and it's also tough on the team, you know, because you know, the team sometimes gets really, I don't want to say emotional, but attached to, you know, I've spent 6 months on this. I want this to work. So this is a tough one.
Yeah, and that's where I think, you know, I've definitely felt the stretch in my role over the last number of years between, you know, balancing the expectations that you have set with certainly headquarters around, you know, what you want to do here, whether something is an experiment or an investment. Whether it needs to deliver immediate returns and results, or whether this is something that we're investing in now that we won't see returns on for a couple of years. So as, you know, if anything happens in headquarters, there's no new person looking at the figures and saying, what's going on here? I don't understand this very well. And so that's where the alignment is really important. Also, from my perspective, juggling, you know, I can never underestimate the power and the importance of a very strong HR or people operations organization as well, as being at the heartbeat of any experiments or risks or investments that you're taking. You know, juggling, say, a US San Francisco based people ops organization that may be quite wired the way that US employment culture is, then having a European based proxy team that also juggles, you know, the very different European employment law perspectives and viewpoints, to then managing the realities of the go-to-market operations between having a Irish-based inside hub, say field sites in Paris and in Berlin and in London, which all have very different employment laws and very different employment philosophies. So, you know, in a nightmare scenario, you misrepresent the investment or the initiative that you're taking as an experiment, which is going to return things fast. Headquarters gets it twisted, wondering why is this taking a year or 18 months to like get ramping. And people in field are like, what's going on here? I feel like I don't have all the support of the organization, or we're not resourced correctly. So there's a very fine balance, and I guess that's what leadership is all about. It's about, you know, creating these investments and these experiments and communicating accurately and then resourcing them correctly so they can ultimately deliver results. It can go super, super well, or it can go in the wrong direction as well, which is why I'm a few more wrinkles on my face than I had a couple of years ago.
Marie-Claire, I don't know if I pronounce it too Frenchy, but Marie-Claire, I'm going to get to your question, but just before, I wanted to ask a bit of a follow-up question for you, Robbie, and actually for Hendrik, based on what you said, Robbie, is, you know, when you start opening a few markets, you get the experience, you know what you can expect. But when you get started, for our audience, can we give them not a trick, but an advice on how can you basically plan your expectations and say, well, if I'm going into that market, what does success look like in terms of number of clients or revenues? You know, with experience, you get the hang of it. But when you get started, is there a way to make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I like the comparison between, is it an experiment or an investment? And I also like, for us, we tend to always in the first place follow the experiment approach. And what makes it really simple for us is to say, okay, what is this experiment going to cost us? And like, so how much return do we expect at minimum? So let's pick the Switzerland example where we said, okay, maybe we can create like in 2 weeks, just like high excitement, like from the market per se, to then understand whether it makes sense to continue. And so basically you just add all the costs, right? Say like, how many people do I send there? Like, do I need to maybe tailor my pitch decks? Like, do I need to invest some time to like have the lead list ready? Do I need to maybe try to like have a first client that I can use like as a showcase? So like everything, like basically like a huge list of costs that it's going to create. And then like, so how many clients do I need to close over what time of what time frame also to make sure to show that this is a success. And I believe this time frame component is really essential though, because like I think when you if you expect that you will see returns just like immediately after you have ran your experiment, I think that's like usually rather the naive perspective. And I think that is something that over the course of time we had to learn here at Sharpist as well. So like, especially as we are an enterprise sales driven company, we would always in the beginning like have expected to have like immediate return, go somewhere, I don't know, like set up a partnership like with Benelux, for instance, and thought, okay, so we're going to have a handful of large enterprise clients just like a couple weeks after this partnership started. Of course, it's not going to be this way, and like it takes like month and month. In our case, actually multiple quarters. And I think, yeah, that's like what we try to do, like really like back of the envelope calculation of what are the costs that we are having, and like what's the time frame of return, and then if like the ultimate like the customer acquisition costs like that we are calculating there justifies against what we are usually doing, we think, okay, first that's then an initiative that makes sense. Which doesn't mean that this will be an initiative that we drive. So, for instance, going to the Nordics now for us would make sense, but there's so many different markets that we can pick from, and also so many other different initiatives that we might choose. So that now we actually like try to like park that then in our backlog and say, so this is kind of the backlog of different initiatives, and we benchmark those against one another to say, really, it's not just about internationalization per se, but it could be like going to a new market versus like buying a company, for instance, or going to a market versus doubling our tech team. And that's like really something that we continuously try to compare and really see like how does the effort that we put in balance out against the impact, and that like kind of like spread over time.
Great. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the time, and I said I would be pretty good with that. I know we're all very busy. So let's just pick, Marie-Claire's question, follow-up topic on what you mentioned, Robbie, about being present in the HQ, given the fact that we're living in a world where travel is a bit more challenging. What are things that have surprised you, challenged you about this moving completely virtually, if it has?
Yeah, absolutely. Great topic, and one that's constantly top of mind for me. So I think not having the ability to fly over to headquarters and just be present and take people for a coffee or for a beer, or to sit in on meetings in person or have face-to-face one-to-ones where you can just cover so much ground, means you have to work doubly hard to make sure that you have a seat at the table and that you have the right influence. So a couple of tactics that I've kind of used there is I've become extra nosy within the organization. I've kind of leaned in, to use the phrase, into many different aspects of the business that I usually wouldn't. So I've like sat in on engineering meetings. I have stayed up late to join some conversations within our marketing organization, just to be there, and to make sure that you're heard and you have a presence. And everyone wants to welcome you into the room, but sometimes if you're out of sight, you're a little bit out of mind as well, and decisions can be made without your input. So that just goes with the territory of the type of role that I have. The other piece is just ensuring there's a constant communication stream. So I give like a weekly bullet update to my boss and his boss and their peers, just on like, here's the things that happened this week. It mightn't even be super dramatic or important, or there might be some big things that happen. Then on a monthly basis, I give a regional write-up. So here's all the things that happen within the region. That goes company-wide. Just a light digest that you can, has a TLDR and a double click into for anyone that just to keep us top of mind. And then finally, we do a quarterly update at the company all hands, which talks cross-functionally around what's happening within the region. We pass the mic between different presenters who talk about their specific aspect, just again to make sure that that we keep the region somewhat top of mind. So it's something that definitely goes with the territory with my role and is quite important.
Good. What about you, Hendrik? I'm sure you used to visit your international markets maybe more often. How have you coped?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, right? Like, it's really, with one thing that we are realizing is, so like the one thing is like selling digital coaching, and the other one is like helping clients to ensure transformation. And that's like, so the one thing is like really tangible, right? Like, okay, you had coaching before, you have 20 leaders, you want to give coaching to them. And what we really believe is that it's not about that. It's like about ensuring that your organization can go through transformation. People are more, like, you increase retention rates and all those kinds of things. And so we've rather even realized the struggles with our client relationships than necessarily with regards to our teams, because we are, like, as a young company, like, our main currency is the trust that we can build with the clients. And I think that, interestingly, like, while the speed of conversation has just like increased dramatically, and suddenly we can talk to anyone across the globe, and we can just be in any market, like, from one day to the other, like, if we just stay up long enough. I think what's like much more tough is also that the conversations per se have become much more transactional, right? So it's almost like our clients are flooded into a call with us, and they are just like sitting there, and like you don't even know where do they come from. Like, you didn't have the opportunity to kind of like, zone into the conversation, and maybe you could have gone to lunch with them. So I think a lot of their initial like marketing and relationship building areas of our work are basically completely put on hold right now. And that has maybe like, interestingly so, increased the number of like different client touch points that we can have, but it has clearly not like improved the quality that we can have. And so what we try to do instead is to send them like some like physical touch points by, for instance, like, now to everyone who starts using our product, we send them a little like box where they have like some, like, I don't know, like just like some beverages in there, just like have more of a physical experience that you like a lot of companies tend to have with their employees now in the remote world. And we try to like translate that into our client relationships. So really give them something that they can feel us more rather than just see us in front of the screen.
Mm-hmm. You try to build a physical or some sort of give a little touch to the experience instead of just a Zoom call.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. All right. I don't want to forget Dennis before we go and before wrapping things up. Dennis was asking about good recommendations for business books. I'm sure you guys can suggest a few things.
Yeah, actually, I mean, like we talked about No Rules from Reed Hastings already, right? I think a classic is also like I think it's What You Do Is Who You Are from Ben Horowitz, I think the second book, which is great also when you think about like building culture and like I think also like transcending culture across like away from your headquarter. And maybe a third one even that I just read recently, where I'm not sure that I like it yet, but I think it's important when you think around the topic about like what can you do. It's called Essentialism. I think it's also one of those like leadership classics. And what I like about it is the general notion of the book to say like to always like encourage you to ask again, like, is this really necessary? Is this contributing to the core of our business? And is now the time, or why now? So that's definitely one that I would start reading before internationalizing next time.
That's a good one. Robbie, any suggestions?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. So it's funny, you know, I had like a little bit of an ignorant attitude towards reading. When I was earlier stage in my career, I was like probably a bit arrogant and thinking, I don't need this. But then as I began to reach barrier after barrier and blocker after blocker, I was like, oh my God, okay, I need a bit of help. And then with some good mentors, they kind of pointed me in the right direction to say, you know, there's some good answers in some of these books. So then I kind of adapted my own operating model to be much more of a learner, and to go out of my way to seek additional advice on areas where, you know, your natural inclination or intuition isn't enough. So I'd almost think about like a number of different areas, and a few books definitely stand out to me for sure. Feels that from a strategy perspective, I really like a book called Playing to Win by A.G. Lafley. He's a guy who worked in Procter & Gamble. And, you know, Procter & Gamble were just the masters through many decades of finding a product, finding a market, finding an audience, and like winning, so to say, whether the field was blue ocean or whether it was a competitive field. From a leadership perspective, I really like the 5 Minute Manager. It's something I always quite liked. And from a leadership communication perspective, there was a lady who actually hired me into Dropbox years ago called Kim Scott, who is a former Googler, and Kim just has now transitioned into being just an amazing mentor and business coach. And she had a very direct communication style that she called radical candor, that she has now turned into like a management movement, which is something I fully subscribe to as well. From a business perspective as well, and within my space too, I really like the Aaron Scott books, Predictable Revenue and From Impossible to Inevitable. I think there are just some excellent playbooks which are tried and trusted, which every now and again when I'm a little bit stuck, or what do we do next quarter or in the second half of the year, I'll go back to that book and kind of see what the Bible says that we do next. So I guess it depends on the area, but I usually have a few that I've picked into and learned from.
Perfect. I told you, Dennis, that they would have more than one recommendation. All right, our time is up. Any final thoughts before I let you go? Final advice?
I mean, like I must say it. I think like I think apart from like just reading good books, I think like definitely take the opportunity to work with a coach. I think that's like, but honestly, like apart from this being our offering, for me that has been like one thing that I really like lacked whenever making like choices, like do we go into a certain market, or like also like what is priority right now, is to have a person without an own agenda to have a conversation with. And that's like, that was like really powerful to me, and always like helped me think what is essential now for our company.
Good. What about you, Robbie?
I really echo what Hendrik said there. I couldn't agree with you more. These steps are complicated, they're fun, they're important, they're complicated. And just surrounding yourself with the right people who can give you good advice, I think is super important. It's a muscle that you can build, is to network, is to build relationships. And I've always been flabbergasted and blown away by how much people want to help, how honored they are that you're seeking their advice and help, no matter how senior they are or how long ago it was that they did something. I think when I reach out to people, they've always been super, super happy to help. Particularly because so many people have trod the path that you've gone down already. So, you know, I think it's important to be patient with decisions, make sure you have all the right data, make sure you're getting all the right advice. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, you're tying it all together in a coherent, well-aligned plan, so to say. The worst thing you can do is kind of rush it or go off intuition, and just kind of go a little bit too fast. Is the way that I typically think about it. But it's an incredibly rewarding, totally fun. It's the reason why we all do what we do in business, is to kind of take some of these decisions and move forward. So it's a fun space.
Great. Well, Robbie, Hendrik, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your generosity, and thanks to our audience for the pretty good questions. I'm going to let you go and wish you all the best for the next chapters, and stay in touch.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here.
Dankeschön and merci.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.